Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. I greet you with Islamic greetings. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome you to our program, Contemporary Issues, in which we continue to look at certain Islamic issues which have come under the spotlight of world attention, where some practices, some beliefs, are questioned by Western civilization, really pointing out that these things are irrelevant and not logical, or they go against modern thinking, etc., etc. And unfortunately, some Muslims have in ignorance fallen into these traps and have become deluded by the arguments which have been presented. So we tried to look at some of the issues and try to understand them. Some of the issues are issues where both Muslims and non-Muslims alike really don't understand why. Why does Islam take a position on this or that? And we hope to try to clarify these issues in our program. In this segment, we will be looking at the issue of music from the Islamic perspective. Music, which most people are aware that there is something in Islam regarding music. To some degree, it appears that it is prohibited outright, or some people feel that Muslims are okay. Music, in fact, musicians are okay. It's quite popular amongst Muslims, and in fact, even the guitar in Spain was developed by Muslims when they were in Spain. Now, the actual issue involved here concerning music is that God has created human beings with a nature which loves music. We can see it with a mother singing for her child. Something like this, of course, Islam is not going to prohibit something which is part of the very nature of human beings, to prohibit it just for the sake of prohibition. So, in fact, Islam does not prohibit music outright, but it prohibits the harmful aspects of it. Music is accepted within a particular framework, but outside that framework it has been forbidden. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited the use of wind and stringed musical instruments. In a very famous hadith in which he said, "There will be people of my nation who will legalize fornication, the wearing of silk for men, the drinking of wine, and the use of musical instruments." This is a hadith which is recorded by Imam al-Bukhari. It is a very authentic hadith. Furthermore, he said that some people from my nation will drink wine calling it by another name. Merriment will be made for them by the playing of musical instruments and the singing of adult female singers. This is also an authentic hadith which indicates the prohibition of the use of musical instruments in general, as well as that of adult female singers. Now, folk songs, which are sung by females who are not adults, this is to a mixed audience, for example, or by males, accompanied by the duff, which is like a small hand drum. This is something which has been made permissible. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged its use in weddings and festivals. And in terms of the recitation of the Quran, it is encouraged to be in a melodious voice. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Whoever doesn't sing the Quran is not of us." So this element of music is accepted within the Muslim society, but that is kept within the bounds of certain festivals, festivities, the recitation of the Quran, etc. And it doesn't become like an obsession. The intent is that it should not become an obsession in the society, because these instruments, etc., they have a tendency to captivate the heart. They captivate the heart in such a way that it becomes the means that people will find solace. When they're down, they turn on the music, this is where, instead of turning to God, instead of reflecting on God, they get their solace in music. becomes a substitute, and they become attached to it in such a way that it becomes like an addiction. And when we look at the element that produces music in the society, because some people argue, but it helps me to study. Some students will tell me, that I study better when I listen to music, and others have a variety of different explanations. The point is that if music were beneficial, then the musicians would demonstrate that benefit in their lives. Where what you see instead is that corruption, some of the most corrupt elements of society are found amongst the musicians. The drugs, the deviations in homosexuality, these type of things, and all the corruption that's there, people committing suicide and all this kind of thing, concentrated in the area of the musicians. Why? If this thing that they're producing is so good, then why don't they benefit from it? The reality is that it in fact does carry an evil and a dark side, which produces that type of corruption amongst themselves, and in the end ends up corrupting elements of the society. If you listen to the songs that are out there, they're promoting promiscuity and adultery and sin, and it's loaded in the songs. Unfortunately, this is a very corruptive element in the society. The other area of the arts, and is that of art itself, where Islam, like Judaism, prohibited the use of pictorial representation of living beings. Islam prohibits it. It's in the Mosaic Law, and it's part of the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ, the prophets maintained. Although in reality one may find examples of image making in later Muslim states that developed, whether it is in Spain or Mughal India or Safavid Persia or the Ottoman Empire. The reality is that this was something quite severely prohibited according to Islamic law. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had said, those receiving the most severe punishment on the Day of Judgment are the image makers. And from the explanations given to us by the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, idolatry began amongst the descendants of Adam through the making of images. The Prophet ﷺ had said that in the time of Prophet Nuh, there were some righteous individuals who, when they died, Satan came to the people and suggested to them to make statues and name these statues after them to remind them of the goodness of these people. And the people did so, and they placed these statues in the places where they used to gather, and in that generation, the people, whenever they saw the statues, it reminded them of the good of those people, and it encouraged them to do good. However, when that generation died out, Satan came to a later generation and suggested to them that, in fact, their ancestors, their grandparents, etc., were in fact worshipping these idols. And that it was because of their worship that their crops were successful, the rain came, and they had good crops, cultivation was very healthy, etc. And with that delusion or this lies which were promoted at that point in time, people fell into the trap of idolatry. So the issue of creation of images of human beings, etc., is forbidden fundamentally because of this. And if we look at those people involved in idol worship throughout the world, the vast majority of the idols which they worship are idols of living beings. Few people worship idols of planets or trees, etc. Most of the idols that we're talking about are living beings. Whether it's a human being with an elephant's head, or a monkey's head, or whatever, or it's a fish or a dog or whatever, people worship idols that are made in the form of human beings or animals. And so it has been prohibited across the board. Now some people may say, well, what's the harm, really? What about people making, we've grown out of this idolatry business, but